Hello everybody and welcome back to the Death Row History Channel, your number one source for all things Death Row history. I am your host, Mr. Toad, and today we will be talking about the Mafia. And at this point you're probably asking yourself, but Mr. Toad, what does the Mafia have to do with the death penalty? Well, you fine folks of YouTube, two words: Murder Incorporated. See, Murder Incorporated was a criminal syndicate from 1934 to 1944 in New York City. They handled all of the murders all of the murders for the Mafia in that 10-year period. The heads of Murder Incorporated was Albert Anastasia, also known as the Mad Hatter, and the Lord High Executioner, and a Jewish mobster by the name of Louis Lepke Buchholter. Now, it wasn't one singular group. There were two different groups that participated. You had the Italian Ocean Hill Gang and the Jewish Brownsville Boys. And so what would happen is the commission would sign off on a murder. It would get passed to Anastasia. Anastasia would give it to either Lepke or another mobster by the name of Louis Capone. And they would choose who got the contract. Murder Inc. is believed to be responsible for up between 400 and 1,000 deaths. However, some research I have done has said that the number could be as high as 30,000 people. So, there is no actual number on how many people Murder Incorporated killed. I do know that there was at least 250 associates in that 10-year period, and that some hitmen had at least 100 bodies to their name. So, I would venture to say that the number is well above 1,000 people, but who really knows? But again, I digress. The most notable contract that Murder Inc. would carry out was one Arthur Flegenheimer. We know him as Dutch Schultz. The Dutchman, the beer baron of New York. He had a issue with, he was being hassled by the head prosecutor in Manhattan, who was at the time Thomas E. Dewey. Keep that name in mind, folks, because that will play an important role later on in the video. Now, Thomas E. Dewey wanted to see Dutch Schultz in jail. In fact, Thomas Dewey wanted to see the entire Mafia in jail. And I really can't blame him. But the So Dutch Schultz went to Lucky Luciano and the commission and said, we need to kill Thomas Dewey. The commission tells Dutch Schultz, no, if we kill a public official, then they will come after us, and they will shut down our rackets, and we will all go to the electric chair. We're not killing Thomas Dewey. Well, Dutch Schultz didn't like the answer, so he went ahead with the contract, and he planned the hit out, and before he could carry it out, he got taken out by Murder Incorporated. And that would be probably one of the most famous hits that Murder Incorporated would carry out. The downfall of Murder Incorporated would be Abe Kid Twist Reles. A hitman in the Brownsville Boys who killed 11 people. And he himself was facing the electric chair for murder and turned evidence to keep from dying. He had a child on the way and he wanted to be with his family. So, Abe Reles cut a deal with William O'Dwyer, the chief prosecutor in Brooklyn. And he would turn evidence and he would testify against would testify in the beginning trials. Kid Twist Reles should have taken flying lessons because he would die in 1941. In November of 1941. And the official story that the police told was that he had tied two bed sheets together and fastened them to an external radiator on the apartment with a electrical cord, and he was going to climb from the 5th story window to the 4th story window, go in through a window into the 4th story room, into the 4th floor room, come out, and then climb the stairs and show the police how incompetent they were. That's what the story was. However, the incompetency part is later speculation. The official story was that he tried to escape. And however, I don't buy it for a moment. Because when his autopsy come out, they ruled it an accidental death. But they did note that the angle of his trajectory suggested defenestration, which, for those that are non-medical, means he was thrown out a window. That means that there's always been the story that the mafia paid the cops to throw Kid Twist out a window. So the media would dub him the canary who could sing but couldn't fly. Now, you would think that the death of Kid Twist would help Murder Incorporated as they face trials. No, not really. The first two, there were 7 people in Murder Incorporated that would go up against the death penalty and lose. All 7 would lose. The first 2 would be Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss and Martin Bugsy Goldstein. Not to be confused with Bugsy Siegel, who would meet his maker in a much more violent way. Okay. They went to trial for the 1939 murder of bookmaker Irving Feinstein, whose body was set on fire and left in a vacant lot after he died. Now, the whole first trial of Murder Inc. was interesting because Harry Strauss tried to fake insanity. And at that point, he grew a long beard and started speaking gibberish because in the 1930s, if you had a beard, you were crazy. It didn't work for him. Kid Twist Relis would testify that the murder was carried out on the orders of Albert Anastasia as a favor to his boss, Vincent Mangano. The Mangano family was one of the 5 families in New York. Vincent Mangano would later be killed by Anastasia, who in turn would later be killed by his underboss, a very shrewd mobster by the name of Carlo Gambino. Such as it is. How do you rise in the ranks? You kill the next in charge. And so the insanity defense did not work for Pittsburgh Phil. And both Pittsburgh Phil and Bugsy would be sentenced to die in September of 1940. In June of 1941, they would be executed. That's 2. Now we go to Harry Happy Mayone and Frank the Dasher Abendondo. Harry Strauss was also involved in the murder that Happy and Happy and Abendondo would be indicted on, but due to the fact that he agreed to cooperate, so they severed him from the trial. And yet again, on May 15th, 1940, during the trial, Kid Twist would yet again testify on the stand as to what happened. The victim, Whitey Rudnick, was a suspected stool pigeon. So they were exterminating a rat in their mind. And it was Happy Mayone, Frank the Dasher Abendondo, and Pittsburgh Phil Strauss that did the murder. And at the end of that trial, which in May of 1940, they would be convicted of murder. And they would appeal, and it would be overturned, and they would get a second trial in March of 41. And during that trial, at some point, Happy Mayone lost his temper and threw a glass of water at Kid Twist. they would again be convicted of first-degree murder in April of 41, and they were formally sentenced for a second time on April 14th, 1941. They would be executed in February of 1942. Now, that's 4. By this point, they while all of this is going on, Thomas E. Dewey is still the prosecutor of Manhattan. He's the one in charge of everything. However, between the executions of Happy Mayonne and the trial of Louis Lepke Buchalter, Mindy Weiss, Louis Capone, and others, Thomas Dewey leaves. He was elected as the governor of New York. So, again, keep this in mind. Thomas Dewey hated Lepke Buchalter with a passion. He wanted to take Lepke down. He wanted to destroy Murder Incorporated and the Mafia in general. So, Joe Rosen, a candy store owner by the name of Joe Rosen, was murdered in 1936. In 19 October of 1941, Lepke Buchalter, Mindy Weiss, Louis Capone, and Pittsburgh Phil Strauss would all go on trial. Of course, as we already know, Pittsburgh Phil will be dead before the trial finishes. And so, by this point, Kid Twist can't help because he's flew the coop already. But they were convicted, Lepke, Weiss, and Capone were convicted of the murder of Joe Rosen, as well as Lepke being convicted of racketeering and a bunch of other charges, both federally and state. But for the purpose of this video, the death penalty, the murder convictions he was found guilty in November of 41. They would, take it to the Court of Appeals, and the first Court of Appeals upheld the murder conviction, so they take it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, at first, they refused to hear Lepke's appeal in February of 1943. However, in March, they granted a review. They then would uphold the decision in June of 43. But there was an interesting thing with Lepke. He was convicted of murder in New York and sentenced to die in New York. But before they could execute Lepke, they had to get him out of federal custody because he was already serving a 14-year sentence in federal prison. So he was, not only was he fighting his appeal to his death penalty, he was also fighting extradition to the state of New York because he didn't want to die. However, it would be futile. And Lepke, Weiss, and Capone would be executed in March of 1944. The interesting thing about all of this is the only person who could have saved Lepke's life was the governor of New York. And there was no way in hell that Thomas Dewey was ever going to give a pardon to Lepke Buchholzer. So, with the death of Lepke, that is the end of Murder Incorporated. It was a very interesting time in American history. Very much a sensationalized, the first sensational story. I mean, you could read what was going on with these crimes and follow everything. And the legacy of Murder Incorporated still stands to this day. You still have stuff being figured out about that syndicate even in 2020. But again, folks, this is everybody's favorite mythical creature, the one, the only, Mr. Toad, with the Death Row History Channel, your number one source in Death Row history, saying, I'm gone.